What if I told you that a dusty, 100-year-old shipping ledger held the secret economic blueprint for our modern world? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're about to crack open the data from the first 9 months of 1924 at the Panama Canal, and you'll see how this incredible feat of engineering became the main artery for a brand new kind of global power.
Just take a look at this number. Over 19.5 million tons of cargo. And get this, that's in just 9 months. We're talking 1924, only a decade after the Panama Canal even opened its locks. Now, this isn't just some big, impressive number. It's a signal. It's telling us that something huge, something fundamental had just shifted in global trade. So what's the real story behind this massive figure?
Well, the story is that the canal had officially graduated. It went from being this incredible engineering marvel to a true industrial artery. This thing was no longer some experimental shortcut. No, it was now the pulsing heart of a new, faster, more connected global economy, pumping raw materials and goods around the world at a speed nobody had ever seen before.
And this slide right here gives us that bird's-eye view of the sheer velocity we're talking about. In just those 9 months, we saw over 3,700 commercial ships pass through. They carried a combined 19.6 million tons of cargo. I mean, that kind of volume proves the canal was now an absolutely essential piece of global infrastructure. But if we dig just a little deeper, the real story isn't just about the volume of trade. It's about who was pulling the strings.
Because this brand new, bustling highway of commerce was anything but a level playing field. Not even close. See, underneath the surface of these massive numbers, a really clear power structure was taking shape, and it was creating a very, very uneven game.
This slide illustrates that perfectly. Economists have a term for this, an oligopoly with a competitive fringe. It's a fancy way of saying you've got a few giants dominating the market, while a whole swarm of smaller players are left fighting for the scraps. And the concentration here is just extreme. I mean, look at the very top of that pyramid. Just 3 companies, less than 1% of all the operators, controlled over 11% of the total market. Meanwhile, the vast majority, nearly 400 other operators, were left to fight over a tiny little slice of the pie. The power was incredibly stacked at the top.
And if we zoom in on that concentration, it gets even more stark. Just 10 companies controlled almost a third of all the traffic. You've got names like Standard Oil, Pacific Steam Navigation, and Luckenbach Lines. These guys weren't just participants in the market, they were the titans shaping this whole new global trade network. So that leads to the obvious question, what in the world were these titans moving that gave them so much power?
And that brings us to the 3 main engines of commerce. You see, not all cargo was created equal. In fact, the traffic was pretty much dominated by 3 very distinct industrial sectors, and each one had its own logic and, of course, its own key players.
And here they are. First, the energy sector, which was mostly oil, was the undisputed king. It accounted for nearly 20% of all the transits. Then you had your general cargo and passenger lines. Think of them as the regulars, just running their predictable routes. And finally, you had the specialized workhorses, the ships carrying minerals and heavy industry. But make no mistake, it was oil that truly fueled the canal's incredible growth.
Okay, now this is fascinating. It wasn't just what was being moved, but how efficiently it was being moved. A typical general cargo ship carried about 1 ton of cargo for every ton of its taxable capacity, a simple 1-to-1 ratio. But then you look at a specialized company, like the Orr Steamship Corporation. Their ships, jam-packed with dense minerals, carried 65% more cargo than their taxable tonnage. They were literally maximizing every single trip through the canal.
This whole idea of optimization and efficiency brings us to our big case study, the Standard Oil ecosystem. Now, this wasn't just another big company. This was a masterclass in how you could take a public marvel, the canal, and turn it into your own private logistical superweapon. Just let these numbers sink in for a second. 248 transits, almost 7% of the entire market share for just one single company. Standard Oil wasn't just a customer of the canal. Its sheer volume was a foundational pillar of the canal's entire business model. This is a textbook example of something called vertical integration, where one company controls every single step of its supply chain. Standard Oil owned the wells, it owned the refineries, and the Panama Canal became the essential conveyor belt that connected it all together. And their power just kept compounding. Remember how the oil sector was the biggest, most dominant user of the canal? Well, within that dominant sector, Standard Oil controlled over a third of all the traffic. It was the king of the king-making industry. This basically cemented the canal as the primary artery for the global petroleum trade, and Standard Oil was the one with its hand on the valve. So, let's zoom out again.
because the impact of this new industrial artery went way beyond corporate profits. The Panama Canal wasn't just moving oil and ore. It was fundamentally redrawing the entire map of global economic and political power.
And this slide, well, it really says it all. The United States accounted for roughly 40% of all transits. This wasn't just a leading position, this was sheer dominance. Led by behemoths like Standard Oil and Luckenbach, the U.S. was cementing its control over trade in the Western Hemisphere, and it signaled a huge power shift away from the old British maritime empire to the new American industrial one.
But the story wasn't just about America. The canal was opening up the entire world. We see the rise of major Japanese conglomerates using it as a vital link for trans-Pacific trade. And it became an absolute lifeline for Latin American economies, allowing them to efficiently ship minerals like nitrates and copper from the Andes out to global markets.
So, to wrap it all up, by 1924, the Panama Canal had completely reshaped the world. First, it created massive economies of scale for the biggest companies. Second, it cemented the rise of American economic power. And, maybe most importantly, it became the essential link, the backbone, for the vertically integrated corporations that would go on to define the 20th century. It literally made the world smaller.
And that leaves us with one last thought. 100 years ago, a handful of industrial giants figured out the immense power that comes from controlling a new global artery. It really makes you wonder, as we look at the incredibly complex supply chains of the 21st century, who controls the critical arteries of trade today?